Hi everyone, welcome again to the PhD Scholar series of Humans in Education. Today I am here with the 7th episode. This episode is about 28 years young Malawian space physicist who is shining in Singapore. Our guest for today is Christopher Luwanga from Malawi, South Africa. Christopher was born in and studied in Malawi before going to New York University, Abu Dhabi to study mechanical and aerospace engineering. He did his PhD in space physics at NTU Singapore. He is currently working on developing space applications that leverage satellites. Today, Christopher will narrate his life journey and experiences as a researcher through humans in education. So now let's listen this young man's inspirational journey in his words. Muli Bwanji Christopher, welcome to the PhD Scholar series of Humans in Education. First, I would like to thank you so much for accepting our invitation and for your valuable time.
Ziko Mogwambiri, thank you very much. I appreciate and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you. So let's start now. Christopher, first, we would like to know more about you from your side. So would you please share?
Okay, so I'm Christopher Luwanga, originally from Malawi, a district there called Kasungu. That's where I grew up. I did most of my life in Malawi until around 2013 when I left for further studies abroad. So that would be the summary of my life at this point.
What is your research area?
So I've done space physics, and concurrently I did space engineering. That's to say that my actual research work was more to do with space weather prediction, understanding the ionosphere and so forth. But on the side as well, our lab had a space mission, and so I was involved in that as well. And so I was doing the physics for research, but on another on certain days, I was involved in satellite engineering. So I like to think that my PhD was both science and engineering.
How did you land up in this research area? What was your motivation?
Early on, I wanted to be a pilot at maybe 11, 12, because it really was one of the most fascinating things you could experience given my context at that age. Seeing something fly above you was really fascinating. And so I thought it'd be quite interesting to fly. And then I grew up and I realized that actually flying is like a driver but up in the air. That's what I realized. It's not complex. I mean, no offense to pilots, but after I realized that it's really just very simple, I said, well, maybe I should do something a bit more I don't know, a bit more exciting. So I started leaning more toward aerospace engineering. And so for my undergrad, I wanted to go directly into aerospace engineering, but instead I joined a certain program at my undergrad school at NYU, where I did mechanical as a primary major or as the major, and then I did aerospace as a minor. And so it was more like being a pilot, but not, maybe I should just later on buy a plane. You don't have to make it a career, but let me do aerospace engineering. Now, then after I did my aerospace engineering, as you know, most aerospace engineering programs are very much about the, I guess, aero part, isn't it? The aircraft part. But over time, I became more and more interested, not in just flying in the air. I figured, okay, I cannot fly. I guess not interesting enough, but make a plane also not interesting enough. Then maybe we should do the space and see if that would be maybe more exciting. Right? So that was the evolution. So by the time by the time I was graduating from my undergrad, I was very much looking beyond airplanes and looking at the spacecraft, and that's how I got here.
So, what is the potential impact of your PhD research work?
Interesting question. I mean, Obviously, it's both a practical and philosophical question. In fact, I do run a podcast of my own where we just discuss, we call it the High Impact Thesis Podcast, where
Okay.
this very question is core to the discussion. Like,
Yeah.
where
So
do you
I
see your
will
research?
also put this link in the description of this video about your.
Okay. All right. Thanks very much. But I really think that the next step for mankind or humanity is going to space. I think there was a time where our whole history was just between two villages, so to say. The people leave to the farthest they could go, maybe is the next village to marry the people at the next village and so forth. And then we came to a point where now it's about countries, right? You can go across countries. I think that's the stage where we are at now. But I think the next step is very likely that we're going to go across planets and across celestial bodies. And I feel that my research, my work around space weather will become more and more important when we're starting to think about travel to other places. And like right now, for example, there are instances. A recent example in as recent as this very year in 2022. Starlink is a constellation of satellites, and the story is that they lost about 32 satellites because of a space weather event. Because of an increase in drag. Okay, that was caused by energy from the sun. There was an increase in drag on the satellites, and those satellites all came down. So that's a loss of 32 satellites, right? So space weather therefore will become really important as we increase the number of objects in space, as we think about travel. If I mean, it will happen, right? When it happens, it will be really important to be able to predict weather in space the same way that today the weather here on the ground determines whether you take your umbrella with you or not. In the future, it will be just as important to plan your trip to Mars or your trip to the moon, those kinds of things. Yeah, so that's what I think is the general direction of space, and I think my research, space weather, would be important in that sense.
And which are the other activities you like to do apart of your research work?
But apart from my research work, I play soccer. Um, I do a bit of music, making electronic, what they call it, electronic music. So like you just sit at a computer and try to make some beats here and there. I find it fascinating what music can do, especially as a language that's able to transcend the this language. Like you can go to a different society and put together a couple of beats and people would dance and smile to it. I find that quite fascinating. So I do like to look into music to try to create beats that perhaps could express emotions to others. And then I read widely. I read widely beyond the space physics that I'm involved in. I try to look into business is one of the things that I'm interested in doing. So I do read lots of business books. I also read science fiction quite a bit because I think that there's a very thin line between science fiction and high technology. So it's like you got to have some understanding of what certain minds envisioned the world being, and with your when you come to a level of PhD, you can begin to see how such science fiction things could become reality. So I think those are the main activities I do besides my research work.
Okay. And why did you choose NTU Singapore for your PhD?
One, it was because they have uh, this very hands-on engineering work that I have spoken about just a moment ago, which is being able to build a satellite during your
Yeah.
PhD work. There aren't many schools that can do that. So when I met the supervisor, I told him that I'm interested in space, and I went to him because he showed us all the projects that they were doing at NTU at the time and still are doing now. And I thought, okay, that would be very interesting because you're able to do the science, but it's not just theoretical science. It's the kind of some of the questions you're interested in answering. You can actually put up a satellite and answer those questions, collect your own data. So that was one reason, like the research facilities for sure. And then the other aspect is, as you know, it's research is about um, money, all right? It's like you can have great ideas as a society and as a community, but it doesn't matter if you can't even get, computing power, if you're not able to get the chemicals that you're interested in mixing and so forth. So NTU is known. I mean, I knew that they have the research facilities and also the financing, so that you as a researcher would just focus on thinking, right? Like focused on creating experiments in your head, and then you would get the support from the government and other entities to be able to execute those things. And then finally, I realized that only after I come here that because of its connectedness, you can do a lot of things from one place, right? So not just in research, but of course, as Singapore is well known for finance, right? So you are able to reach essentially a large chunk of the globe just by being in Singapore. And I think that's very important for the direction that I'm interested in taking my research or my academic work. Yeah.
Can you please tell us a bit more about your research group? I mean the activities they carry on.
Okay. So my research group has, like I mentioned, essentially two components. One is more physics or science rather, and the other is more engineering. So, for example, my work was more on the physics side, studying the ionosphere and irregularities in the ionosphere. That was my work. And then we have someone else who was doing more like thermal management of this spacecraft. How do you make sure that the spacecraft doesn't the temperature doesn't get too low or the temperature doesn't get too high to spoil your things on the spacecraft. So he was creating models of thermal models of the spacecraft and so forth. And someone else was modeling clouds, and someone else is working on more like how do you create a successful space mission and so forth. So our lab really consists of those two components: space engineering, which is one, of course, research, but the other is just actual work. Like we actually build satellites and we're launching satellites. And so some of the researchers are involved both in doing research work, but also involved in real projects with the government and other entities here.
Okay.
Just our lab generally is called it's called Satellite Research Center. So in other words, satellite is the main thing. So the physicists and so forth were there as attached, but their main job or the bread and butter is actually building satellites or doing research around satellites, because we're one of only two main satellite labs in Singapore. Ours here at NTU, and then there is another one at NUS, which is the other university in Singapore.
Okay. And which are the another research groups which are working in the similar research area?
Well, the actuality of space missions is that you leverage other people's skills and other people's experiences. So you try to be in touch with other labs. Our lab in particular has connections with the University of Colorado in Boulder in the US. And so many of the space missions that have been done the last few years had some collaborations with this university. There is also some work together with a university in Japan called QTech, or Kyushu Institute of Technology. They've done some missions with them as well. And there is also a university in Taiwan called, I think it's National Taiwan University, NTU as well. And then some unis in Germany as well. So the main idea is you try to get a team of people that have different experiences that come together to build, so to say, something that would have taken far longer if you'd done it yourself. So maybe if you're doing a space mission that's an optical payload, you don't build the optical payload yourself. You get it from another lab that's specialized in that. And then maybe the electrical power system might come from somewhere else, or the thrusters on the spacecraft might come from another lab. So generally, the main for in particular in space, the main countries now are the US, India, China, Russia, and what am I forgetting? Right? I think these are the main countries.
Okay.
Right? But so generally you try to collaborate with people from these countries. I mean, some countries, of course, are kind of off limits, but but in general, you know, you would like to collaborate with India because the like for example for our some of our spacecraft, they've been launched by ISRO, right?
Oh,
And
yeah.
so to sometimes you work directly with ISRO, but sometimes you work with Indian. There's an Institute of Space there that we've also collaborated with. So depending on what we need, we try to really reach out as widely as possible across the globe.
You are awarded with a specific scholarship for your PhD program.
Yes, I was awarded singer, which I saw that I think you spoke to someone. Uh, what's her name? Ruchi, right? Right. So I think that she might have said something about it, but essentially it's an international graduate student award. It stands for Singapore Graduate Award, Singapore International Graduate Award, I believe. But it allows you to just focus on studying because they give you a stipend and they cover the tuition throughout your 4 years, up to 4 years. You have to make sure you finish by 4 years. Um, and in general, the process is you find, at least the way that it went for me, is you find a supervisor who's interested in supervising you, and then together you kind of work on a proposal now as to what research would be meaningful to you, but also to the lab which your supervisor is in. That is, it's adding to whatever they have as a mission. And once that's clear, then you send this proposal in to the school, and then the school does the admitting. Yeah, so the single award is what I've been under.
Okay. As a PhD student, which challenges you find?
No challenges at all.
Challenges.
No. Okay, but I think it's well, I feel that I could have used a bit more of other people's brains. Okay, that's what I felt. Okay, that you know I came all the way from some country far, far away, and then I come here and I spend a majority of my time on my own in front of a computer, and I think that that was not it's not my favorite part of it. You know, so I realized that people work differently. I think some people believe that you have to figure things out on your own, right? And so I in you know I do ask questions, um, but sometimes you know if you're in an environment where that's not normal, it becomes tiring, right? But I really would have preferred to be in an environment where it's truly an exchange of knowledge between people, and so that I can get what I'm not able to get if I were home, you know. So I think that was, for me, it was a personal challenge, and it's like I feel that that could have been improved. I mean, besides that, it's normal stuff, right? You know, you chase deadlines. You have some weeks or months where you're really unproductive and so forth, and it hits you. I guess it can be demotivating sometimes and so forth. But I think these are normal experiences, on normal phases of the PhD. I'm not sure it's good to say that it's normal, but it seems common enough that it's just it's just brushed aside.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, quite interesting. How is your experience in living in Singapore as an international student?
it's been very good. The day-to-day life here is especially if you're living on campus, it's quite cheap. You know, Singapore is known for being expensive, but if you're living on campus, then it's quite cheap. Um, and then Singapore, very small but really dense in terms of activities, right?
Okay.
So I I find that the number of things to do is so much more than I have the time to do, right? So it's unfortunate that I haven't been able to do a whole lot of things, but it does have a lot to offer as a place, as a small place. So I think the experience has been broadly positive. Maybe I would have, in a way, I could have interacted with the culture a bit more than I did. I think that, as you know, in PhD, international students find international friends, and then it just becomes this bubble that you're in, right? Like, so I think that there is very little interaction. I mean, now that I have finished my PhD, I've actually made an effort to go out more to interact with the Singapore community a bit more. And now I live in this house with the Singaporean landlord, and so through that I'm able to have conversations that are hard to come by, I guess. So I find that to be quite exciting because I feel that visiting a place you must be with the people. You must it's different to read about and to just meet fellow international students, but to live with the people of the country is something that I'm excited about, and that's why I'm doing it now. So
Uh,
it's been positive, yeah.
and what was the first cultural difference you find when you first time moved to Singapore?
Cultural difference. Uh, I guess cliche about food. I think it's just food is a bit different, really.
It's
Um,
spicy.
Sorry.
It's spicy.
Eh, Well, it's not as spicy. I mean, because spicy, I mean, as you may know already here, the majority of the people are Chinese, and then I think the third largest group is the Indians. So the Chinese, the Malays, and then the Indians. So the Indian food is the spicier one, I find. But because of my undergrad, I actually grew up eating, not grew up. I mean, I spent like 4 years eating a lot of Indian food. So spiciness was not a real problem. I think I can handle quite a bit of I mean, spiciness abroad, because if you go to India, spiciness can get crazy. But so I can handle the spiciness here. I think it was just the difference in terms of the actual food. Um, like I really have never entertained eating crabs. I've never thought about eating frogs, for example, right? So when you go to a place and then somebody's giving you frog soup, or if someone is ordering frog soup, it's just so bizarre. Okay,
Yeah.
I haven't tasted it. It's just a psychological barrier, like how will I explain to my mother that I'm eating frog soup? She'd be like, "What is going on?" So I think that's the cultural, I guess, cultural shock. It's just that people love food here a lot. Actually, I'm very surprised, and they go really wild in terms of the number of the kinds of foods that they eat.
Okay. And Christopher, what is your future goal?
I want to use my space engineering and space science knowledge um, to to do what could not have been done if I hadn't existed. So I would like to either in terms of location, I do something where it's in a different place. For example, if I were to build satellites in Malawi, it would be new, right? Or the actual thing that I do is new, just new. It's not just that it's new in Malawi, but it's new globally. And so, I like I mentioned at the beginning, I do feel that our next big step as humanity is going beyond one planet in a serious way, and so I'd like to my future to contribute toward that, enabling us being here, being somewhere else, and really enabling travel to the moon in a real way. That's where I'd like to apply my space physics and space engineering knowledge going forward.
Wow, that's nice.
Yeah.
And one last question, Christopher. What is your advice for the students who are applying for the PhD, international PhD program?
The advice is um, to be clear about what you want out of it. because as the PhD itself is, is something that shapes you and shapes your life. And just like everything in life, by gaining the PhD, you lose something as well, right? And it's hard to quantify what that is that you lose, right? Maybe it's the it's the energy that you had before you started your PhD, and you lose that for life, for example, right? It could be a sense of curiosity that you had that is just lost because PhD hammers you and so forth, right? So I would say that you need to do the analysis in terms of what would, like, you have to take seriously the stories of people quitting PhD. Okay, you have to take seriously the stories of people saying it's painful and it's hard, right? And then you say, okay, but there is this that I would gain, right? So you are realistic about what you might lose, but also you nevertheless you commit that I'm going to do it this way.
Yes.
The specific topic, I think it's important, but not terribly important. Like, I think the idea is that you should learn to do research. That's more important than a specific topic because things move very fast. So, like in machine learning, that's the field that I applied the tools from there. Like, something today, 2 years down the line, it's no longer as useful, right? So don't focus too much on the topic. Of course, have a good topic, but think broadly about um, how that would affect your life and how that would affect your contribution to your family, to the community, to the world, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's nice advice. So, yes, Christopher, I am already reading a lot of news about your research work on LinkedIn nowadays,
Okay.
and it is indeed very inspiring. So, I
Okay.
wish you best of luck for your all future endeavors. And thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for your valuable time, and thank you so much for this insightful discussion. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Papali. It was a joy being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.